It is Caftan week and I am super hyped.
Caftan. 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 Caftan! Okay. I hear you. We'll do another Vintage versus Repro. And in today's version, we're gonna tackle the Caftan. And that's going to be comparing Simplicity 8505, which is the modern Simplicity that I just picked up at Joann's and paid far too much money for, and the original Simplicity 5315. Now please don't let the envelope scare you. The pattern is actually in pretty good shape. It's just the envelope is sad. And as we do in all Vintage versus Reproduction, we're gonna go in our normal order. Number 1 being the envelope. Number 2 is going to be those instructions. Now, I heard you all in the walkaway dress, and I did want to take a moment to go ahead and let you know that I did hear your requests. And even though the instructions will probably have more detailed steps for the very beginner, I'm not gonna harp on those because it was brought to my attention that those really help folks that have never sewn before and really just need somewhere to start and be told exactly what to do. Whereas more skilled sewists can just go ahead and pass by those instructions. So I heard you, I appreciate the feedback. Thank you so much for letting me know because I have been sewing since I was 8, so occasionally I forget that sometimes you do have to go all the way back to step 1. So my apologies. Thank you all for coming back and watching this. And of course, number three is going to be, that's right, the pattern. Now, I'm hoping that because it's Caftan, it's not going to be that bad because really it's just squares with some sleeves and hopefully they don't screw this one up too bad. Maybe. But the only way to know is to go ahead and dive right in. So let's get started with the envelope. So the very first thing we see when comparing the two is that, well, the vintage is in really sad shape. Like I said, the envelope doesn't always necessarily translate to how the pattern's gonna look when it is inside. But as you can tell, the brand new one looks, well, brand new because I literally bought it at Joann's like yesterday. I do enjoy how even though it is torn, you still have the size here, which is going to be 12 to 14. So that is a bust 34 to 36 for this time frame. So when we go to line it up with our all size version over here, we're going to have to make sure that we're lining up to the correct lines, which are what? Great. Right in between the two sizes. Cute. And because the modern is an all-size pattern, you are actually going to have to be looking at in between a small and a medium because the small goes from 32.5 to 34 and the medium is 34 to 36. So we get to look right in between the two lines. Helpful. And other than that, they actually look pretty similar. However, I will state again, Simplicity, please, for the love of heavens, stop magically erasing the numbers off of your freaking covers. I don't know why you're concerned that people would want to go back and get the vintage ones, except unless you have things to hide, which is, hi, we've already learned that that's sort of a thing now, haven't we? But please, put the number somewhere on the modern one. So that way, if people actually do want to go back and look for the original, they know what it is, and they don't have to go diving through the internet or the wiki for hours to try and find this. And again, I do actually prefer when they keep the line drawings. That's just my personal preference. But I like how they just had to make it a little different for the modern one, so they switched the ladies. Sure, if that makes you happy, why not? And now on to the back. Now on the back, we see the standard differences between a vintage and a modern pattern. Those are that the vintage actually has the full pattern layout, so that way you know exactly what pieces you're looking for, as well as the flat lay finished version, which is all the modern pattern actually gives you. And because it's a Simplicity pattern, you do actually get the descriptions here and here. And what's interesting about this one is Simplicity actually opted to go with the body measurements, the sizing, and then the yardage for each of the caftans, which is actually pretty similar to what you see on the vintage one. So that's kind of nice that they kept that sort of in line. And then the one thing I do think that the modern patterns get really well done and correctly is that they give it in another language on the other side. So that one I still say is 2 thumbs up, way to go Simplicity, for being inclusive. English is not the only language that matters. Yay! Although the one interesting thing that the vintage pattern does that the modern pattern doesn't have is the quick measure right along the top of the completely destroyed envelope there. That's supposed to be some kind of ruler that's been destroyed over the years. I'm sure when it came out, when it was nice and fresh, it would have been nice to have that right along the top. Looking at you, Simplicity. But it's just one of those nice little things that they put on the vintage pattern that they don't have on the modern one. All right, enough of the envelope. Let's head into the instructions. Now for the instructions, we're gonna go ahead and start out with the vintage. So we're looking and we see first up a metric chart, so that way you could convert your inches to centimeters relatively easily. And then we head into the cutting layouts, where it really shows you that just because you have 35 and 36 inch fabric that you think is from the 40s and 50s doesn't always mean it is, because as you can see, it was still being produced and put onto cutting instructions all the way into the 70s. And the largest fabric that you can see noted here is going to be a 60 inch width, but they sort of combined and mushed everything together so that your 54, 58, and 60 have basically the same layout as far as cutting goes. You again have the pretty standard, here's your completed look, what it should look like in the back on each side, and again your pattern piece layout, so that way you can double check in case you've lost the envelope or the envelope has been destroyed. You can also check that there. And then we go into how to use your Simplicity pattern, and it basically gives you the best tips of how to use your pattern successfully. And then it jumps right into the sewing instructions right here in the bottom corner for the very first caftan, which is view 1. We turn it over, and really all the rest of it is just sewing instructions for both view 1 and view 2. And it'll take you all the way through so you can see everything that you're supposed to do here, and then you get into view 2 about midway through the back of the page. Pretty simple, not too complicated, not a whole lot of extra paper where extra paper isn't needed. Let's go to the modern ones now, shall we? So what we have here, again, is pretty standard. The only main difference as far as the layout goes is that, well, you don't see the ladies anymore. But they kept the finished garments front and back. And then we go into our lovely pattern layout here, which, I'm gonna be optimistic, looks all right for right now. So then you have the cutting layout, which is down here in the bottom, and it really keeps you only to the 44 up to a 60 inch width because, well, we don't print things down onto 35 and 36 terribly often unless they're like specialty fabrics, so c'est la vie, it is the times. And then of course you have your Spanish right over here on the right hand side. And then on the back side we jump straight into the sewing directions, which is great. I really wish that we didn't need to have all this unnecessary white space. There are better ways to do it. You can do the diagram and then the words, and then the diagram and then the words, and you know, like the vintage version does. If I'm being nitpicky, that's what I'm gonna be nitpicky about. And so then you can see here, it just takes you all the way through caftan A, so they just changed it from 1 to A and B to 2, whatever, it's fine. And then on page number 2, it has the final step of view number A, 1A. Yes, caftan A has the final step of caftan A. Which, like I said, if you would have used your white space a little better on the first page, you could have put them all on the first page and then started with B on this one. But again, that's just me being nitpicky and a stage manager. So then we start with caftan B and a very large amount of white space left for no apparent reason. And then we just go through the instructions here. Pretty standard, nothing terribly bad, but again, you have lots of dead space. And then on the back, we're just finishing up the caftan B, and then you have the overall view for the Spanish instructions here on the side. And the only note that I would have in this moment is that why we don't have the French instructions along as well, since the French was on the back as well as the Spanish. But here we are. But we at least get 2 languages, so that way this can be used by a larger group of people. And again, I know you're not here for the instructions, so let's go ahead and dive into the pattern pieces. But first, we're gonna have a little discussion, Simplicity. Why do you feel the need to make people tape this crap together? Seriously, why? The vintage patterns somehow managed to just be able to be cut right out. And yet, the modern one, you have to fork and tape it together before you can even do a damn thing with it. Not necessary. Now I understand home sewing isn't what it used to be, but Come on now. I just paid you $17 and I still have to arts and crafts this crap. Anyway, okay, off soapbox. So we're gonna go ahead and start with modern piece number 3, which is the front facing for A. And we're gonna have right here C, which again, they just renamed them as they went along, so I don't really care. But I again have the bust 34 to 36, which means that it should, in my brain, it should line up with the medium size, or maybe somewhere in between the small and the medium, because again, the small goes up to a bust 34 and the medium starts with the bust 36. So it should, crossing our fingers, be right in between the two. Hopefully. All right, what do we got here? Shockingly, that's not that bad. I mean, it's definitely small. This lines up almost perfectly with the small size. But yeah, if I go ahead and line that up, there is a little difference in the neck. Looks like 1/8 of an inch difference in the scoop of the neck here, which does then transfer over if you line everything up straight on the edge here. I swear I ironed these last night, but it just doesn't feel like staying ironed because it's old. But we're basically almost spot on for the size small for this medium size 34 to 36. Not bad for piece number 1. Let's go ahead and do the neck facing, which that's a joke, but it's fine. Letter D to number 4. I'm guessing they must have forked with the neckline because this doesn't really line up. I mean, it vaguely does, but it's not great. Yeah, you can see in through here where there's a sharper curve. It's a 1/4 inch difference at most. It flares out about 1/8 of an inch along the far end as well, but the curve actually lines up pretty much, again, with the smallest size of the modern one. So this might be the very first time that we have one of our patterns that has far too much ease. Cute. Look who just got groomed! She's so fluffy and cute. Isn't she precious? Hi, hi. Oh, where are we going? Where are we going? Oh. You're so cute. You're so cute and fluffy. Look at you. You're so cute. All right, to the daddies. All right, so what I'm seeing is when I line up my neck, my neckline is almost spot on, almost, to the actual neckline of the small again. However, the vintage one actually cuts in to make a more shallow sleeve line and then flares out a little bit, actually much more than the small does. So it comes into the shoulder about 1/2 inch and then slowly flares out to being actually a 1/4 inch wider than the modern one. And then what's odd is that the seam line for the vintage, so the cut lines should be lining up, but they don't. It's 5/8 of an inch wider on the sleeve lower down. So while the top did that nice curve for the shoulder, the bottom just sort of truncated everything up, made it a nice square rectangle and said screw it and moved on with their lives. Whereas this one, there's definitely more of an angle and there's definitely it's a closer cut in, but we still don't even get to the line where the small is. But the fact that the lines are so different on the bottom side, it shows me that there's actually more room in this sleeve than there is in the modern one. As well, it also looks like when it flares, there's more flare out to the vintage one as well, by at least 5/8 of an inch. And you also have, what's funny is the placket almost lines up. No, it doesn't. So there's a 1/2 inch difference for the trim placement, and then the secondary trim placement is also like it's a sharper curve, and you're looking at a 3/4 inch difference there as well. But then when you look at the actual kick pleat, it's even shaped differently. So the vintage one is much slimmer. You use less fabric, basically, is what you're doing. So it's a much sleeker line. So it's 12 1/4 from the little hash mark they give you to tape it to the bottom of this piece. Let's see what the length of the other one is. Hey, not bad, 12 1/2. So actually the length on these is even. And I'm basically to the medium. So if you want to give it the more vintage feel, you're gonna push your line out to where the medium line is. Only one more piece for this version, and we're looking at B, which is the back sleeve, and 2, which is the back and sleeve. So yay, being named the same. Hooray! Yay! So since the rest of our pieces had lined up to the small, we're just gonna go ahead and start out lining up with the small, even though it really doesn't make sense because it should be somewhere like here. But we're just, if every other piece is like the small, sure. So you can see I've done my best to line up the back line here. And again, those lovely lengthen, shorten marks have moved. And we can see here that again, there's that funky little dip in where the shoulder should go to kind of give this vague thing slightly less of a rectangle and more of an actual shape. And then it flares back out. That's my microphone cord. And you can see there where it's starting to split the line to like give it just like the touch of a bell sleeve, not actually a bell sleeve though, but just a little bit of a shape. And then again, possibly because we have the 34 to 36 line up with the small, that arm's eye curve again is very different, although this time it actually does dip all the way into the small size. And like I said, if everything lines up with the small, that tells me that we're actually making these modern patterns slightly bigger than a 34 or just allowing for more ease in a 34, because this 34, 36 is even still slightly shy of the end of the sleeve for the bust 32.5 to 34. Then to the bottom we go. Bottom of the barrel? Yes, sure, why not? So again, as we go down along this, we're splitting the difference because we're slowly flaring out more as we go along. Now, not to the point that you're actually getting to the medium line because the medium line is like there, but you're right in between the two sizes of the modern reproduction. And you can see there's the seam line, and then of course we have to jump because they decided to not print it all on one piece of paper because that clearly makes sense. Now, let's go ahead and line it up. Line it up, line it up. Why is this pattern such a freaking pain to freaking line up? Wow, okay. So by the time you get to the back of the pattern, you actually are on the medium. So this vintage pattern is definitely giving you more of a flare in the back of the skirt and sides of the skirt, as opposed to that weird kick pleat situation in the modern version. So yeah, by this point you're sitting at 7/8 of an inch difference from the small line, even though everything else basically lines up with the small. So if you want a vintage feel for this one better, you want to give yourself more at the bottom of the pattern. And now for the behemoth. And we're going to start with small pieces because again, this is a gigantic pattern. So we're going to start with our little midriff here. And actually, it's the exact same. Literally everything lines up except for like maybe 1/16 of an inch on the far side. The notches are different, so be careful there. Don't think you can use a modern and a vintage and line up the notches because that's not going to happen. All right. Great, that one lines up. Hooray, good job, Simplicity, you got one! I'm so proud. All right, a back neck facing can't be too bad, right? That's perfect, basically, is what that is. Like, that is an exact duplicate, which we have not seen to date yet. Everything has always been slightly off. So the fact that we now have two pieces that lined up basically perfectly makes me wonder if they actually got this one in a donation so that they could reproduce it from the original instead. But I'm pretty surprised. I realize that a back neck facing is what's shocking me is really sad, but this is where we're at, friends. Who's ready for a yoke? Come on, I had to get one in this one. All right, so we have, wow, pretty close. The top is a 1/4 inch off, but everything else lines up, so that's always good. It's kind of nice to see that, you know, occasionally we can get something to line up. No shade, I promise. All right, and now let's go ahead and let's do the armhole facing. Oh, right. There is no armhole facing in the modern version. Not at all. So someone decided somewhere along the way that this gets nixed, and you're about to find out why. Welcome to my floor. Why am I on the floor? Because this gigantic piece merits me being on the floor. Now, Stephanie, you may be wondering, why exactly are there 2 tissue papers left when there's only 1 vintage piece left? Well, my friends, that's a lovely question, and one I'm asking myself as well. Okay, so here's what they did. Now, I'm also guessing that you probably had to piece this one back when only like 36-inch widths were predominant. Editing Stephanie chiming in here just as a real quick aside. No, actually, it only required 44 through 60-inch width fabric for the layout. It had nothing to do with 36 inches, so my apologies. Continuing on. So what I'm assuming they have done is they've taken the pieced version and made it the permanent version. Even though it's very, very simple nowadays to get 56, 58, and 60-inch width fabric. I have many thoughts on this, none of which are terribly nice. And if you're wondering to yourself, Stephanie, why don't you just cut it? It would be easier. It's because I want to resell this thing because I don't want it. I don't want this thing. I want it to go back away. Come here. Nope. Nope, nope. Nope. So even if I line it up, the small on the modern one is at most 1.5 inches wider. Ease doesn't really begin to describe what they put in this pattern because that is pretty big. The armhole thing sort of lines up. It's not great. A quick note of clarification about the arm's eye shenanigans. With the extra piece provided by the vintage pattern, it allows you to do specific techniques that allow you to really make it a little cleaner in my personal view. Whereas the modern piece just tells you to double fold it and stitch it down. So that would also be partially why they don't line up. Alright, now back to your regularly scheduled roast. Y'all, it was basically a rectangle with some cutouts. Why did we need to take so many liberties? Final thoughts. Well, they started out really strong and then veered off into right-hand turn lane, let's do it our way. After view A and really looking at the very minute details, which in the grand scheme of all the comparisons we've done, this was one of the closest actually. Yeah, it definitely tells you that the small pattern has a bit more ease than probably it should. But, I mean, the lines were pretty close. A little dip at the shoulder, a little flare at the bottom. Not too big of an issue. And then we got to view B, where liberties were taken. Yeah. I'm not really sure why the pattern companies decided that you need to do an arts and crafts project before your arts and crafts project, but that's a choice. And why we decided to go with the piecing, even though modern fabrics are, on the whole, much larger. Now, I'm not saying that you're not going to choose to do this out of a 44 or 45 inch width fabric, and you wouldn't have had to have pieced something anyway. But when there is 60-inch fabric available, why did we insist on changing it when even the vintage version didn't make you do that? Because really, at the end of the day, the second one, it's a rectangle. It's really not that big of a deal because a little bit of extra width on a rectangle, if you don't like the fit, just chop it down that extra 1.5 inches or whatever that was. But when they opted to not do the arm piece, the arm facing anymore, I guess it had to go with the cutaway of how they sculpted the arm in the vintage piece. So sure, that's fine. I understand having to get rid of it. But it's another one of those things that why that was really necessary when I'm pretty sure, at least by the way that looked, that they drafted this from an original pattern. Those facing pieces lined up perfectly. The yoke was a 1/4 inch different. They had this pattern. I can almost cross my heart, raise my hand, do whatever. I can almost guarantee they drafted this from an original pattern. And they still made these choices. So there's that. If you enjoyed this content today and you would like to see more in this series, please make sure you're leaving me patterns down below in the comments so that way I know which patterns to look for. Now I do want to temper expectations here because remember, vintage patterns are hard to find sometimes, and while I do have a plethora in this house, I do not have all of them. For the next 2 versions of these, I have one pattern coming from Australia and one coming from Georgia. So please do feel free to leave me patterns down in the comments below of ones that you are curious about. However, know that finding the originals and the reproductions in similar sizes sometimes takes a little bit longer. If you did like this video today, make sure you do smash that like button, and you are making sure to subscribe for future content and sewing experimentations and just general life happenings here on the channel. And if you do feel so inclined, please feel free to click the bell icon so that it can push a notification directly to your phone or tablet, whichever device you do prefer, so you know the next time I upload a brand new video. And until next time, stay beautiful, friends, and we'll see y'all next time.
Okay, you are recording and action.
Bye.
Bye.
And he didn't push record on the audio. And as we do in all vintage versus reproductions, nope. And as we do in all vintage versus talking. And as we do in all vintage versus reproductions, we're gonna go through and do them a couple different ways, and I can't talk today. I'm not really sure why we have to make people do a craftsy Good, the trash man is here. That's excellent. Where it tells you a basic understanding of how to make their pattern up. Why? Why can I not words? Move the mic over there. Anyway, so because these pattern pieces are forking gigantic, not bitter at all. I hate how big this thing is. Come with me to the floor. Busting out our staff of power, or giant yardstick, whatever, you know, they both work.